Welcome to Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. Hello, Otterites. Welcome to episode 132. I am Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis.
And I still have not figured out why I don't use contractions when I introduce myself, but you guys do.
I think Francis did not use a contraction that time. I was listening, and I don't think he did.
I did.
Really?
But it was... I blew through it a little bit quickly there, so it's very possible. But no, it's... I've always used it. You've always used it. It just kind of happens that way. And what's up with you?
I
don't
think
know.
it's the formal beginning, you know?
It's got to be
I
that.
guess so. I guess because I'm first,
Right.
I don't use the contraction.
Okay,
Maybe.
that's fine.
Maybe you're just more uptight than the both of us.
That's probably also true.
I would take that bet. Yes,
I'm kind of like Chef in
South Park?
not South Park. I'm sorry, Apocalypse Now.
Oh,
You
yeah.
Wrap too tight
for New Orleans. That's right.
Probably wrap too tight for Vietnam. Probably wrap too tight for New Orleans.
That's right. Yeah.
So that's
played by one of our favorite actors, Freddie Forrest. Yes.
Yes, a peek behind the curtain. Otterites. Martin's the wound up tight one.
I think by now they know that.
Already didn't say anything.
After 130 episodes, they got that part right. So 132. This is our history episode.
First week of the month? First Friday of the month?
Yes, for December. And, of course, it is the 80th, correct?
80th, yes.
The 80th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. So, of course, that is
the
our...
entrance of the U.S. into the World War II. Yeah, that's right.
So, of course, that is our topic. Infamy, the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Yes, we're kind of doing the beginning at the end, in many ways.
But how could we do otherwise? I mean,
exactly. Because of where it falls on the calendar, we
Yeah.
had to do this one now. Yes.
Yes.
So we're kind of...
And that's okay. We're good with that.
And this pretty much will wrap up World War II episodes. Again, we spent pretty much all of 2021, for the most part, on our history episodes during World War II.
Right. We interspersed a few other things, but not many.
We popped a couple in there. Of course, one of my favorites was Kiss My Drunk Russian Ass, our examination of the 91 Russian coup.
Oh, well, yes.
So that was a favorite. So, guys, Pearl Harbor is a pretty complicated thing when you scratch past the surface.
It is.
You know, you think, oh, well, you know, it was just a surprise attack and then we were in the war. But like anything, there's more going on than initially you'd guess.
That's right.
Right.
It's complicated.
Right. I mean, Trevor Slattery makes his appearance very early in this episode.
Yeah.
Yes, he does. That's right.
You know, it became a caricature of the dishonest Oriental and the shifty Japanese attacking us, but it's...
In a way...
That's not it.
No, in a way, you know, this is a modern version, not nearly to the extent and not nearly to the almost evil purpose of the Lost Cause myth. Or of the German... We were stabbed in the back at the end of World War I kind of a thing.
Right.
You know, because we were attacked. I mean, we were attacked first. We were trying to sit out the war. Now, granted, we were helping the Allies in Europe. But, you know, we were essentially sitting things out no matter how much many of us wanted to be in the war.
Right.
And so we were attacked. But there's a lot of questions around whether or not we allowed ourselves to be attacked in the Pacific.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, there was a headline literally a week before, that said, and I forget the paper, but it said, Japan may attack this weekend. And, you know, this is November 30th was, I think, the date on it. So we knew they wanted to attack us. Yeah. We expected it.
Yeah.
Well, we knew that negotiations were for sure going nowhere.
Right.
And those here's the setup is, of course, in the 20s, Japan had wanted to be a part of the international community very greatly. They participated in the League of Nations after the war. They participated in a great number of treaty negotiations and all these things like, naval limitations and all that. They were very much engaged on the world stage after World War I. But a lot of that came to Zippo, Bupkis, nothing. And they began an expansion program in the 30s. Became more militaristic. Of course, invaded China. And then you get
and
to
what kind of cojones does that take when you think about the size difference?
That's right.
Well,
and they held it.
But they also knew too that China was a shambled mess.
True.
It was
if there was ever a time for Japan to be able to attack China, it was in the 1930s.
And everybody else had a piece of China. Why shouldn't Japan have a piece? Was kind of their reasoning.
Yeah,
true.
And they knew that the modern world you needed resources. And that's what this was a drive towards.
Ding, ding, ding. That's if you want to boil it down to the real reason, that's where it was at.
Oil.
You have to understand that.
So that leads to their expansion into Indochina, the South Pacific, their eyeball in the Philippines, and we know this.
Right.
And then you get to the middle 30s, and of course you have the infamous and horrible rape of Nanking.
Yeah.
And it becomes clear that Japan's sort of turning its back on the rest of the world, and it's kind of like, well, we're going to do what we please, and we don't care what you think anymore.
Well, again, I think you have to understand the Japanese mindset is not the same as the Western mindset when it comes to these things. The cultural differences today are great between the Western world and Japan, even though they are far less. They are a quasi-Western culture now.
Yeah.
But 80 years ago, it was totally different. Honor was the only thing that mattered. And by kind of being not quite shut out, but by not being treated the same, to them it was going to be a matter of honor. And their whole idea of honor and warfare especially revolved around whether or not you were truly human.
Mm-hmm.
If you lost, you had no dignity, no honor. You were no longer worthy of being a person. So when you take that attitude into war, you're going to see things like the rape of Nanking. I mean, it flows one from the other.
Yeah, if you can't stand up for yourself,
right,
then what's your point?
Exactly. You
don't need to exist.
In a way, it's a very Nietzschean outlook.
Yeah.
You are either the master or the slave.
Yep.
There was no in between.
And on our part, it's not like we were angels the whole time either.
No.
Racial prejudice, seeking to exclude the Japanese from immigrating to the West Coast. That was part of what was going on in the 20s and all of these negotiations and treaties and trying to figure out, hey, can we have a good relationship with the United States? But by the time of the 30s, it's basically they're going to grab anything they can get a hold of, hold it, and we don't care. And they knew then that this is putting them on a collision course with the United States.
Correct.
And they eventually got to the point of war is inevitable. We're going to strike first and try to knock out the United States with an immediate death blow. And of course, the place to do that is Hawaii.
Right, because if you take away Hawaii, we have to operate from the West Coast. That's damn near impossible to do effectively. You've got to have a forward base to be able to operate.
Yeah.
It's got to be secure.
Yeah. And that is the whole point of Hawaii. It was a forward operating spot to help protect the Philippines and the rest of the Pacific. Right. They decided that the Philippines was untenable as a forward base, but they thought Hawaii would be fine. They thought it's far enough away that, woo doggies, it's going to take something to hit Hawaii. But the Philippines were exposed.
Right.
And that became U.S. doctrine.
Yeah, too close. Plus, the Philippines, all those islands, that's a lot harder to defend than, just a handful of islands in Hawaii.
Yeah. So, the interesting part to me in this build-up to the attack, and I'll kick this out here for you guys to kick around a little bit, but in researching this, obviously the Japanese are very, very modern in their Navy at this point. As far as what they have. Again, there's 6 top-line aircraft carriers.
Right.
But the doctrine they're still working from, though, is this classic Alfred Mayer, I'm getting his name wrong, Alfred Thayer Mahan
right.
doctrine of it'll come down to a great battle between the capital ships, the battleships.
Jutland.
Exact, Jutland or Trafalgar, and all this steeped in history doctrine is what the Japanese admirals grew up in. This is what they know. Yet their greatest success was done with the new weapon, the aircraft carrier.
Right.
And of course, the aircraft carriers are not present. The U.S. carriers, only 3 of them, they're not present in Hawaii. But the Japanese didn't think that was a big deal. The target was the battleships.
Right. And yet, looking back on it, that, and movies and discussion post all that zeroes in on, well, they should have known better. No, they shouldn't. Because, as you say, they're working out of a different playbook altogether.
Well, they're working out, but they're not working out a different playbook in this particular battle. It's entirely a carrier-based battle, but their overall doctrine is it's going to take the battleships, which, as we talk about show prep, how odd that you're trying to make your decisive blow to knock us out of the war, and you're not even bringing your battleships to the fight. I mean, they were probably there with the fleet, with the carriers, but the battleships had nothing to do with this fight. Absolutely nothing.
Other than being the U.S. battleships are the target.
Right, I mean the Japanese ones
but
were.
the Japanese
ones. That's what they wanted to avoid, I think. They did not
odd.
want that prolonged battle because they didn't think they had a sustainability.
I don't know. I think if they were willing to attack with the aircraft carriers, I think if the American fleet had met them in the open seas, I think they would have gladly gone ahead and attacked. They obviously are better off attacking them on a Sunday morning when everybody is just waking up and they're all docked in a nice, neat row. So if you miss one target, you're sure to get the next guy.
Oh yeah, it's a dream in many respects. If you're going to do it, if you're going to make a preemptive strike,
right? If you're going to present that kind of target, of course that's where you're going to strike first.
Right. And tactically, the attack on Pearl Harbor is a huge success.
Yes.
Again, they hit what they were aiming for.
That's right.
Did they aim for the right thing?
Exactly.
Well, that's a question of strategy.
Yes.
Well, and if they had, and there were, like with any battle, so many things had to go right. And if just a few things that had gone right for them that were incidental had gone wrong, it could very well have been a different outcome. The U.S., unbeknownst to the foreign powers, has a much more advanced radar than anybody realizes. And so they're expecting this flight of bombers coming in from the mainland. Mm. So when they see all these planes show up over Hawaii, it's no big deal. Oh, those are the planes we're expecting.
Yeah.
No, they're not. Think about that. If they hadn't been expecting those bombers, could they have gotten planes scrambled? Could they have deflected enough of the attack?
Would they have seen it for what it was?
Would they have seen it? Yeah, well, if they're not expecting any planes, yeah.
It would have taken them a little bit quicker to figure it out. You're right.
So, it may not have made a huge difference, but it might have made enough of a difference that they don't press the attack as heavily as they did, and some think they didn't press it enough, because as we talked about, they left things untouched.
Yeah, there was a press for a third wave, but doctrinally, the admiral in charge just was like, well, that means if we hit a third wave, that means bringing them back at night. We don't do, that was not part of their doctrine, was night landings on the carriers. So he withdrew after 2 waves of attack. Again, in targeting the battleships, that means they left the fuel depot alone, which Nimitz said if they'd hit that would put us behind at least a year, maybe 2. They left all kinds of dock facilities alone.
Right, if they had destroyed some dry docks, that could have been another year.
Huge. And one of the buildings that they didn't touch in the basement is the famous cryptanalyst unit that would go on to be so important in Midway.
Right. Which is interesting because at this time, and maybe they thought it wasn't important because at this time in Hawaii, they weren't actually allowed to do a whole lot of this because there's not a whole lot of funding. The cryptoanalysis is a very young science to begin with.
Young idea.
And it's understaffed, undermanned, and because of the usual territorial battles, that was something that wasn't even allowed to be done there. So it's very minimal, that kind of work, but it would go on to play a huge important part.
Yeah. And another big key here, too, again, is this... the Americans are more concerned about sabotage than an attack. and in doing so, arrange the planes on the ground where they're easy targets instead of inside, hardened hangars or anything like that.
Right.
They want them out in the open so that it's harder to approach for a saboteur. But hey, guess what? All I got to do is come down the line and strafe all these planes and they'll all blow up.
Yeah.
So hundreds of planes are destroyed on the ground. The battleships are sunk. Again, in a tactical sense, as far as their aims of the attack, huge success.
Right.
Right.
Exactly what they wanted.
And in a ground war, and a win like that would have been followed up immediately.
Yes.
Because you would have troops on the ground. But because we're talking about thousands of miles between their home bases and the point of attack, and our home bases and the point of attack, it's very difficult to support a follow-on attack. So, that's one of the things we always like to talk about when we talk about those what-ifs.
Yeah. Well,
what if they had gone ahead and invaded?
Yes, that's just the huge strategic failure. Again, not hitting like the fuel depots and the dry docks and some of these other facilities that supported the aircraft carriers, but also no invasion.
That would have made all the difference. Had they been prepared for that, and that had been their strategy, they would have taken that whole island group very quickly. It would have been bloody.
It'd have been a mess.
But
they could have done it.
They could have done it.
Absolutely.
They could have done it.
And that would have
then
changed.
we're stuck.
And then we're stuck.
We're having to invade it, staging on the West Coast.
That's right. And that's
But
that would have been. We could have done it, but it would have taken it would have lengthened the war in the Pacific to even get back to where we started from by probably 2 years.
Yes. Oh yeah.
At least.
Yeah. It's
it's a
huge mess.
Some of the best alternative history fiction I've read includes this. Japan invades Hawaii.
Yeah.
And more than one story. It always happens. Because when you think about it, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But you got to realize the other thing they're doing is they're still in China, and they want the Philippines.
Yes, because the Philippines are attacked simultaneous
Exactly.
to the Pearl Harbor attack.
So my sense is they couldn't do all three at the same time.
Right.
Because Japan is not that big. Even though it is a very militaristic society, you
Right.
still have that's huge to be able to do
It's an enormous commitment
China,
of resources.
Philippines, and Pearl Harbor to attack and occupy all of those at the same time. So
Right.
I think that probably has a lot to do with why they didn't.
That's right.
Right, because again, doctrinally, they think the decision is not the aircraft carriers, but the battleships. And if we can sink the battleships in harbor, then an invasion is not necessary.
Right.
We'll get what we want, and they'll have to give up.
Wrong answer, of course.
But yeah, and that's strategically a huge mistake. And again, it ties to this naval guru that everybody based their strategies on, this Alfred Thayer Mahan.
The destroyer was named after him, by the way. It was one of the old force stackers between the two wars, but there was a USS Mahan.
Even Theodore Roosevelt was a huge fan of this doctrine.
Well, yes. Teddy liked the big stick.
Well, yeah, the Great White Fleet, it was all based on that.
Yes.
And some of this goes back to the Dreadnought when it was launched and everything changed. And then all of a sudden you've got all this business of, oh, wait a minute. This is, it's prestige.
Well,
it's
also,
appearance.
practically, when you think about it, when we think of Europe, we always think of land wars. There's not really a whole lot of coastal or sea battles that go on except over supply lines and what have you. But when you think about taking your navy someplace to fight, the ability to bombard the shore installations, the docks and so forth, from 10, 20, 30 miles offshore is very much akin to an air attack.
Yep.
So strategically, and tactically, it's an incredibly effective weapon. Mm-hmm. But in reality, there's not a whole lot of places you can actually apply it. Oddly enough, Pearl Harbor is one they could have brought the battleships and done this. If they had brought the battleships along, now they would have had to bring in the carriers and the fleet a lot closer. It might have turned into an all-out melee, and they might not have been able to get that close. But if they had been able to get in close enough to bring in those battleships to bear, who knows what kind of havoc they could have wreaked.
Yeah, again, it's a tactical success, but a strategic failure.
Yeah.
And what happens, of course, is that the Americans become the masters of the combined arms, of the idea of your air power is not by itself, infantry's not by itself, the Navy's not by itself. The island hopping campaign, becomes this feat of combined arms. You're using your air power effectively. You're using, ironically, these battleships that were thought of as the be-all, end-all, they become just artillery platforms. Mm-hmm. They're just floating artillery platforms,
which essentially is what they really are.
That's right.
I mean, but they
were used against. Yeah, they ended up being used against the land.
It's a very Napoleonic approach.
Yeah,
very much so, and that's the whole reason the battleships were created, because you're thinking back to the age of sail and Trafalgar and all that stuff. One of the problems was once they got into harbor, you can't get them. And you have to blockade and all that stuff like that. The British were great with all that sort of stuff. If you can destroy them from afar, then all of a sudden that advantage goes away. And Napoleon, to shift gears, Napoleon on the ground was a master of combined forces. Artillery, infantry, and cavalry done in perfect synchronization.
Right.
Normally.
And the Americans end up inheriting that mantle.
That's right, yeah.
Because they use the infantry, amphibious infantry, with using the battleships as bombardment of the island.
They have more components than Napoleon had, of course.
And then using the air.
We don't think about it much because, we think about warfare. We think, Army does the stuff on the ground, Navy does the stuff at sea. And, at this time they both have planes. But, when you think about the war in the Pacific, the water's carried by the Navy almost entirely because it's mainly Marines and the naval forces, ships and naval air forces.
Yep.
So that's all under the Department of the Navy. And they really do carry the water, so to speak, in the Pacific. And it's phenomenal that they managed to do it. I mean, there are some Army units in the Pacific, but most of them are in the East. They're in the European War and the African War.
That's right.
Because realistically, you don't need as many ground units in the Pacific because you're not going up against million-man armies.
Yeah.
You're going, island by island, you're going against 20, 30,000, 40,000 Japanese at a time. Your Marines can handle that. Because, they're Marines.
They're Marines. I mean, there were Army divisions attached and in these amphibious operations, so... we got to give everybody their due.
Yeah, well, and I said that, but the Marines do carry the brunt of it.
Yeah. So, fellas, I think at 22 minutes, this is a good stop for a bourbon break, and then we'll talk aftermath of the battle. So, we are Otterites. I'm so excited to welcome the fellas back to Studio M. We are comfy. Robert's in the recliner, and Francis and I are on the couches. And we are very mellowed back. We are trying a couple of new bourbons today here, or one new bourbon in this episode.
Yeah.
It's called Stonehammer. It's named for Thomas Metcalf, a former governor of Kentucky. This is sort of a mid-price. It's, I think, if I'm reading the internet correctly, and of course everything you read on the internet's always right.
That's right. Yeah, Abraham Lincoln told us that.
Yes. This is a Kroger exclusive, and that is where I bought it, in the Kroger liquor shop. It's about a $23, $24 bottle, so again, kind of at that mid price point, similar to, say, the Four Roses and
small batch.
Yeah, some of that other.
Yeah, I mean, probably that's even a little bit on the lower end price wise of that. I mean, it's certainly not your VOB kind of but it's in of that mid range. It's a little bit lower price range.
It does have a cork, and it is in glass, so it's not.
I like
not
to say
the plastic screw top one.
That's right. I don't think we've had a plastic screw top bottle yet, which is good.
No.
But I've said this before, and the more that I try different bourbons, I've noticed that the bottles really can be an indication, not always, but they can be an indication of the quality of the bourbon. If you're going to put the time and effort into the bottle, I think you've probably put the time and effort into the bourbon. And I would say that is true of this one as well. It's a good-looking bottle, by the way.
It is, absolutely.
It really is.
The cork is big and honking, and it's got
good lines.
Yeah, good lines, and it's got a bluff bow, as Jack Aubrey would say, and fine seabird when she's handled well.
So I've poured mine over ice. Francis did soapstone, and Robert did neat.
Yes, so we actually have 3 different ways to taste this.
Right.
So, unfortunately for me, the nose was a little heavy with medicine smell.
I did pick that
a little,
up. It didn't
a little,
bother me.
a little antiseptic.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
picked it up.
But still, the flavor is smooth, nice and warm in the esophagus. Really hangs with you. I think ice is important for this one. I think it helps mellow it quite a bit.
I'm looking forward to trying it with ice because, as you know, I tend to have mine with ice or the steel balls or the soapstones. So trying to mix it up.
Yeah, but it mellowed out quite a bit after.
Yes.
After the first snort, as the ice melts, but again, very comparable to a Four Roses. Four Roses probably a little smoother, a little mellower.
Yes, I would say a little smoother. Yes. It's not harsh like a Devil's Cut, but you notice it more than you do some of the others, like a Basil Hayden. It's so smooth. It's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. This thing stays in the back of the throat for a while.
It does.
It does.
And it takes a while to make its way down to your stomach.
It does. That's right.
As far as the effect, that burn, that warmth.
Mine doesn't go up. I've taken several drinks of it now. It's always down. But you've had
I've got a little
experience.
bit hint in the nasal passage, just a little bit in the back.
sinus, yeah.
Not every drink that I've sipped has done that, but I still have it, which again is interesting. Which I don't mind. It just depends on the effect. In that, it's maybe a little harsher than I would prefer, but it's not bad. It is a good bourbon. It's a very light-colored bourbon. They must not have charred the barrels very heavily. How many years is this aged?
It does not say as far as an age statement.
Oh,
and lots of bourbons don't do age statements. But of course, it has to be at least 2 years.
Right. That's a bare minimum. 2 years is probably going to be on your bottom shelf.
So I would say this is probably a 2-year age.
It shows, the light shows through.
I don't know.
The color very, it's almost like it almost looks the color of iced tea.
Very
weak iced tea.
Weak iced tea, yeah. I would bet this is aged more than 2, just because it is pretty smooth. It's not. It's a little bit more complex than something like a very old Barton, which is my go-to example of the low-end bourbon.
Yeah.
Anytime you get a good hunk of bourbon for only $10, it's low-end, but it's still bourbon.
Old Granddad's very similar.
Yes, Old Granddad. Yes,
they're both down at the bottom, but hey, they're still good.
Yeah, we'll have to figure out what the aging is, but I'm betting this is a 4 or 6 year bourbon.
I would say 4. I would say 4 max. Yeah. But it is local here to Louisville. But Stonehammer, a Kroger exclusive.
It's got a great name. You can't beat that.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
And a very agreeable price point. But not something stellar. If you find something else at that same price point, I wouldn't argue with you.
Right. I'd probably choose the Four Roses small batch over this, or even the regular. I'd choose the 1792 over it as well, which is also in that mid-20s, a little bit more than this. But
it's hard to beat that.
I'm just glad that I'm not getting that huge antiseptic taste. Again,
Right.
I got a touch of it on the nose for the smell, but at least on the flavor, I'm not getting that.
Yeah, I think
that's
that
good.
burn that I'm getting in my nasal passage is that antiseptic bit, but it's very mild when you get it to me, because I can only get the hint of the antiseptic when I give it a good sniff. I like to sniff the bourbon before I taste it.
Yes, you gotta get the nose.
I think just like with wine, I think you need to get the fragrance.
And get that nose up in there.
Get oneself prepared.
Yes, get a good snort before you take a snort.
So, Robert, how are you doing with soft drinks? Still keep them cut out?
Yes, tomorrow will be 2 months exactly.
Excellent.
Since I've had a soft drink.
So Francis is snorkeling a soft drink right now. So we're
Side by side.
Side by side, that's correct. A chaser, one might say, but not really.
I often have water, or when I was still drinking soft drinks, just to mix it up, especially earlier in the day.
Yes. But I've been considering what we've discussed about the sugar and about that heavy sweetness and the effect on the taste buds. Are you really feeling like your palate's clearing up?
I don't know. I don't drink bourbon that often. I mean, none of us drink probably except when we're hanging out together very often.
Pretty much, yeah.
But because of that, it's a little bit hard to say whether or not it's truly making a difference as far as the bourbon. Maybe a bit, but in general, I don't know.
What about
I still
other
drink
things?
sweet stuff, so I don't know if the sweetness is still overpowering it.
Yeah.
I don't have a whole lot of carbonation.
Yeah.
I drink a ton of water during the day, so even though I'm drinking sweet stuff, it's not a whole lot.
Yeah.
Like I'll have coffee in the morning, and I'll put a caramel sweetener in it.
Yeah.
When I'll have Crystal Light sometimes during the day, which is going to be sweet, but not super sweet. I don't have anything that is overwhelmingly sweet like soft drinks.
Yeah. I don't know. I've been rethinking this, and maybe my initial, thing was just wrong. Maybe the corn syrup doesn't ruin your palate. Perhaps I just have a far superior tongue to both of you guys.
I knew he was going to go there.
Daggone, that one the longest setup I've ever heard. But effective.
Effective.
That's correct.
I'm just a silver-tongued devil, and I'm getting all these good flavors.
Well, that could very well be.
Or maybe it's just time, because that is something I don't sweeten coffee. Uh-huh. I do like my good black coffee.
Yeah.
And when I cut the soft drinks out, I did move pretty much completely to unsweet tea.
Right, which I'm not a huge tea person, but I couldn't imagine doing unsweetened tea. I can't imagine doing unsweetened coffee. For me, coffee is either too watery or too bitter. But I've always liked my sweet drinks. So
that's it.
It's hard to cut back. But, I am not drinking as much sweet stuff as I used to. So,
maybe
it
just
may
more
take
time.
some longer. Yeah.
Maybe just a little more time.
Nothing else. I find that I'm not even missing the carbonation as much.
Yeah.
I do drink those sparkling ice lemonades, but I don't have those all the time either. So,
all right. Well, that was a good 10-minute bourbon break for me to make that joke about my tongue being better.
10-minute setup.
Oh, the pain.
But I'll give you that one. That was a good setup.
Okay.
Aftermath.
Yeah, Aftermath of the attack. So, again, where do we go from here? It's a strategic failure. A tactical success, a strategic failure.
But they really don't know this. It's a strategic failure until you can make the argument they know it as early as Midway, just 6 months later.
Yeah, right.
Give or take.
I was going to say that seems to be all of a sudden it was like that's the oh shit, what did we just do? Moment.
Yeah, very famously, Yamamoto tells the senior staff, "We've wakened a sleeping giant. We haven't knocked them out like we thought."
That's right. Would. You have to kill them.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
the idea here was to hit them so hard at Pearl that they want to quit, and they're not quitting.
But that's an underestimation of the American psyche.
It is
very true.
It really is, because if they had been hit like that and suffered a devastating defeat, that would have been a blow to their national honor, identity, and dignity. And that would have been, I think, a serious setback for them. Now, they probably wouldn't have told anybody because, very militaristic. It's not like they had newsies all over the place on battleships and aircraft carriers.
No embedded reporters.
Right, no embedded reporters. So it may not have weakened the resolve of the Japanese people because there was no resolve of the Japanese people. They just did what they were told.
Right.
But with the Americans, we're still only 50 years removed from the Wild West. And I think that's an important thing to consider as well.
Yep.
We are still a relatively untamed... Hell, we're still a relatively untamed country. Just go to Chicago, for God's sake. We are still, at this time, full of vim and vigor, or piss and vinegar, whichever way you want to put it. And the American psyche is very much, if you punch me in the nose, when I get back up, I'm going to kick your ass.
Well, it's the Alamo, which that's the exemplar. That's the one point, if they had studied that, they would have come up with a completely different answer as to the American character. Yeah, that's an easy one to pull right out because it's so well known, it's so well documented, and it's so clear as to A plus B equals C. But
again, they do what we do, though.
Yeah.
and they applied their own standards to the enemy.
That's right.
And that is
therein
probably
lies
one of the
problem.
biggest downfalls of every loser in a war. They underestimated their enemy because they thought the enemy was just like them.
Sun Tzu,
Yeah.
know thy enemy and know thyself, and you will always be victorious. They did not follow that.
Right.
Well, they thought they did.
Yeah.
There is, you know.
Well, yeah, their assumptions were totally different.
Right.
Well, that's why, when we fought the war in the Pacific, our assumptions about them were totally... Even though, we had seen where they were going and how they went about things, our assumptions about them were totally different. When our men were captured, they expected to be treated differently than they were.
Yeah.
We expected the Japanese on those islands to surrender, not to fight to the last man.
That's right.
So, on both sides, it was a totally erroneous outlook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The cultural tagging was off.
Yeah,
completely.
even as different as we were from the Germans in the war in Europe, they were still more like us because
Yes.
it was the same culture, root culture, European culture. And maybe that's what made what they did so much more heinous to us, because we saw ourselves in them.
That's a good point.
The Japanese, what they did in China was, you can argue that it was just as bad, just as horrible. It wasn't as systematic, but
Right.
it was just as brutal.
Right.
It wasn't as
Yeah.
industrialized.
And there was a whole set of war crimes trials for the Asian or for the Pacific theater, and Japanese leaders were hung for their actions.
If you
during
do the
war.
one, you can't do the other. You can't
Yeah.
not do the other. So,
So-
but which one gets the press? A lot of people don't realize that there was a Pacific Theater War Crimes Tribunal. Now, obviously, the war in Europe got the most press. Period. So, I mean, that's understandable. But even to this day, we focus on the Nazi atrocities.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just because they hit too close to home. I don't know.
It's documented. It's
True.
wow. It's and right. It is European. It is, again. We look in the mirror. We see somebody that looks just like a German.
Right.
We see somebody that looks like us. So one other thing I want to kick around before we finish up this episode, and Robert hinted at this in our open, the conspiracy theories.
Yes.
No historian really gives these things serious weight. That it was a setup. That Franklin Roosevelt was in on it. But as far as needing an excuse to get in the war, Roosevelt had to wait for something.
yes.
He couldn't just declare war.
He did not have the will of the people that far.
Right.
Right.
Well, we were very much an isolationist.
That had been our history, although we did have World War I as a precedent.
Well,
So
but
which
we
had-
were attacked too. In the and
Yes.
we finally used that as the excuse to go. But there were attacks on American ships in the Pacific or in the European War prior to the declaration of war.
Right.
And yet we still didn't go to war.
We still didn't declare war against Germany even after attacks in the North Atlantic.
Right. The USS Kearney and the other one, which was sunk.
Was that the Reuben James?
Yes, the Reuben James. Yes.
So, this being a direct attack against the naval facility at Pearl Harbor.
And it's massive. Civilians die, military people
it's
die.
3,000 plus casualties. So, I mean, if you look at it from a cynic's point of view, it was just what Roosevelt needed
At the exact right time.
at the right moment.
And there are some that argue that while that if you want to go with the conspiracy theories, that he thought something was coming, but that he had no idea it would be this bad, and so the misjudgment on his part was not so much in allowing it, but not expecting it to be as bad as it was, and therefore being a little bit more prepared.
But the kind of the thought is the Americans were deliberately torpedoing these negotiations with the Japanese to make sure the Japanese were provoked into an attack. That seems like a bridge too far to me.
Yeah.
I mean, diplomatic negotiations fail all the time. It happens. What they were trying to do was just against American interests, and it just became too far to go.
And that was always the case. And I mean, negotiations were almost laughable in many respects because we both wanted the same thing. We wanted the oil fields.
The oil fields.
There was only so much.
Yeah. Well, again, though, you can. It's the spin, really. I mean, I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
You could say that. Well, you're just putting a different spin on the exact same events and the exact same intentions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the U.S. wasn't going to give in. So, do you want to call that torpedoing the negotiations? You could. Because if your goal is peace at any cost, that's torpedoing the negotiations. Right.
Ah, well, yeah, there's where you kind of get into this.
But you're right.
That's very Neville Chamberlain type stuff.
It's very much again, the oil fields, the East Indies, the oil fields, the oil embargo was seen as kind of that last straw that really
it's a post-colonial mindset. We went into this, even though we weren't particularly colonialist. We had something, natural resources, and we liked it.
Well, we were, but where we were colonialist was in the Japanese backyard.
That's right,
and that's the problem.
I mean, that's the friction, and again, the oil is a huge part of this with the oil embargo seen as the last straw, and what really pushes the Japanese to feel like, well, we don't have any choice now. There's going to be a war. We might as well start it, and we've got to hit a knockout blow. We've got to hit one right out of the park right from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they went about the preparation very logically, with I think a good understanding of what was required at a very high level, but they ignored all the soft factors. What we would call the soft skill kind of stuff in the business world.
Right.
They ignored the American psyche, what the American response would be. Or didn't understand what it would be. They totally misrepresented to themselves the nature of the American man, the American woman, in that we weren't going to take any crap.
Yeah,
because we wanted to stay out of the war doesn't mean that we wouldn't try and kick your ass if we got into it.
Yeah, it's always our we've said the same thing as a gag for 30 years of, hey, we really want to get along with you, but if you piss us off, we'll bomb your country.
Right.
Right.
That's the American way. It is kind of the American character. Hey, we really want to get along with you. We don't want to have trouble, but if you piss us off, we'll bomb your country.
That's stolen from Robert Williams, actually. But yes.
Oh, that's where that's the source.
We used it for so long, we've kind of thought of it as our own.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's from Robert Williams.
Yes. Thank you, Francis.
I forget the preamble to that, but it's basically, if you piss us off, we'll bomb your cities.
That's right. Think about it. That's right. We're Americans. We're simple people. But if you piss us off, we'll bomb your cities. Think about it.
Oh, well done, Francis. Yes. Well done.
That's where we stole it from.
Yeah, that's where we stole it from. But, it's one of those things that it's funny because it's true in many ways. We're not 100% like that, but we've got enough examples in our history that is the case.
Yeah.
It's not unheard of.
I think we even surprised ourselves, though, in our response to the war. Because when you think... I am still astounded and just awed at what the Americans were able to accomplish in such a short amount of time. We went from having no war-fighting industry. None. It was all just basic, let's maintain our very small military, and we had a fairly decent-sized Navy in the Pacific, but it was outdated.
Well, it's 3 carriers. I mean, it's half the size of the Japanese
the
force.
The destroyers that we had there, the cruisers, the battleships, these are all World War I era designs for the most part. They were not modern at all. The carriers were modern, so to speak, but carriers as a unit of warfare was barely 20 years old.
They were changing every 6 months.
Right.
I mean, you were finding out new stuff about carrier warfare all the time in the 30s.
Exactly. So, that was... And even so, we only had 3. It didn't evolve that much for us. But we managed to mobilize our industry in a way that is unheard of.
Right.
Germany and Japan could direct their industry from the top down. And while, yes, there was a lot of top-down in the U.S., there was a hell of a lot of bottom-up as well.
Yeah.
Oh,
Ford and GM and Chrysler, they stopped producing cars for the duration of the war. And they started producing in those car factories tanks and jeeps and planes and everything that you could possibly think of that we needed to fight the war. We were building Liberty ships, one a week.
Yeah,
start to finish.
Yeah.
Laying the keel to getting it out into the water and into service in a week. Think about that. I mean, it just blows my mind.
Churning out things like the C-47, I think it's called the Dakota, the transport aircraft, just churning them out by the hundreds. Is
and
a huge
manning
key.
all of them.
Yeah, a huge key.
So, our industrial might, I think, was bigger than we even realized.
Right. You're exactly right.
And,
Japan did not realize that the sleeping giant. That's
Yeah.
really what he's referring to.
Well,
Yes.
Yamamoto had spent time in the U.S. He was educated in the U.S. He knew the country better than any of his compatriots.
He knew we could turn on that faucet
Yeah.
and build
Well, I think he
anything and
suspected
everything.
it far more. I think he probably suspected more than most of us did.
Yeah, and it's exactly what happened. Again, we just okay. Well, let's start making shit, and all over the country making stuff. Whatever was needed, we can make. We can invent synthetic rubber and make it, and just churned out all that stuff.
There were war bond rallies. There were rallies to collect scrap and old tires. And I mean, you were looked upon as practically a trader if you bought new tires during the war for your car. And you were practically expected to run on the rims.
Yeah, because they
to
needed the
war.
rubber. Yeah,
And the entire country was united in a way that we never saw before and still had yet to see. We saw it for a little bit after 9/11.
for about a week.
Well, until things sort of got bogged down, as the press kept saying a month after we invaded Afghanistan.
Yeah.
But then, of course, 2 weeks after that, it was all done.
Yeah.
Because we were just getting in there and getting prepared. But, that didn't last long. For 4 years, we were as united as we could possibly be. I mean, there was even rationing in this country. Can you imagine trying to impose rationing in the country today? Look at what we've done in the last 2 years with COVID. Society practically broke down. We practically, had everybody lose their minds.
Well,
because they couldn't find frickin' toilet paper.
Because we've gone from a self-sustaining, localized economy where most people are on farms and work within the local area to a just-in-time inventory universally.
Yes, and that is the danger of our system.
Because
yeah,
we're too far removed from the means of production.
But I mean, even if we weren't, I think and maybe that would produce a different mindset. But it's just hard to imagine the country today voluntarily taking on that kind of burden for more than a very short amount of time. Because people were into the COVID lockdown for just a couple of weeks and they were already going nuts.
Yeah. Well,
and that was just staying home.
The TikTok attention span.
Yes.
We can't handle 4 years of sacrifice to defeat an enemy of this nature anymore.
Yeah, I mean, which is again, Tom Brokaw. He makes a very good argument for calling the World War II generation the greatest generation.
Yeah,
because they did something that has not been seen since.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things I want to talk about as we wrap this up. What's our time on this?
We're at 48, so
all right, so we're a little over where we wanted to be, but
we're in good shape. So finish that thought.
Unforeseen consequences of this attack literally changed the history of the world. Not just because of World War II, but it was the event that caused the Americans to truly become a world power, a superpower.
Evolved power.
Yes.
That we were sticking our nose in everywhere.
We were a world power before then because, we had the Philippines, we had Hawaii, we were around. Nobody would want to tangle with us without being...
The world's leading economy, the whole bit.
Well, I don't even know that we would necessarily have been the leading economy at the time.
Between the wars, we were.
Well, probably between the wars because we weren't devastated like France was and what have you. But and we didn't have quite the 20-year depression that Germany did. We were in the midst of a depression when the war started. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't necessarily call us an economic powerhouse, other than we were the least affected by the intervening years. But my point is, though, for being a world power is one thing. England is a world power, but it is not a superpower. World War II made the U.S. a superpower. It directly put us on the path to unarmed Cold War conflict with the Soviet Union. Now, we were probably headed there anyways, but because the Soviet Union was in Europe, we probably expected France and England to take the brunt of that. That changed with World War II.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It was no longer that. It was us versus them.
Right. They supported us as opposed to us supporting them.
Yeah. A subtle language shift, but a very powerful...
Well, a subtle language shift, but also a total flip.
That's right.
In the relationship between us and the rest of the world.
That's right.
Yeah.
The U.S. was no longer the junior partner in world politics and in European politics.
Yeah, and in fact, the entire world would split. They're either on our side with us, or they're with Soviets. Exactly.
It was U.S. versus the USSR, not Great Britain versus the USSR, not France. Well, France would have been, they're not so bad. We might like them.
The borscht is not bad. We'll take some of that.
The borscht is not bad.
Yeah.
We'll send them some
berets, good wine and they might be okay.
Some cheese. Yeah.
But, it's still, when you think about what would have happened if they had not attacked us, if we'd just gone through a Cold War in the Pacific, as opposed to a hot war in the Pacific and the Atlantic.
Yeah.
Because it would have been a longer time to get involved in Europe.
Yeah.
If at all. Because if Hitler decided not to attack, he would have probably eventually.
And we still did not get involved in Europe until the Germans and Italians declared war on us.
Right.
After Pearl Harbor, we declared war only on Japan.
Exactly.
And for some reason...
Hitler decided.
Hitler declared war on us.
He did have they were part of the tripartite pact.
But it didn't have to. Even under the terms of the pact, he did not have to.
Well, he could have said, screw you. We don't, you take care of them for us and maybe we'll come in and mop up later. But yeah, he could have done that and he didn't.
Yeah.
Again, that was his ego.
Yeah.
And he thought, well, they'll either be busy with the Japanese or they're just Americans, which is what the Japanese thought.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it.
They're too used to their lifestyle to rally like this.
Right.
Moto had it right. He awakened a sleeping giant.
And I was about to say we haven't gone to sleep since then, but yeah, we have. We've slept quite a bit here and there. Yeah. We have had our faux pas and what have you.
All right. Well, I think that's a pretty excellent episode. I really like what we did there, fellas.
Yeah. Good job. That was great. I like that we talked a lot about the lead up as well as the aftermath.
Yeah,
that's right. Big picture stuff. That's what we're about here.
Kept it organized and did a good job. So you guys were on point. Very awesome. Francis, buddy, what is next time?
We're going to do, it's Code of Honor, of course, but we're going to do another thematic one. Which we like these from time to time. We don't always do them, but we've been doing a lot of them lately. The next two episodes are going to be about, I think, and we all think, one of our greatest presidents, Teddy Roosevelt. I'm surprised it's actually taken us so long to get to him, because he's really so much foundational in a lot of what we talk about.
You really got to sharpen your sword when you're taking on Teddy. There's a lot there.
How are we going to do that? Even in 2 episodes, it's going to be hard. But next episode, Code of Honor, great quotations from the great TR himself. Be here.
Hope you enjoyed another pointless discussion of eternal questions. Remember, new episodes published every Friday at noon Eastern.
Spread the word. We're on all the major podcast platforms. And leave us a comment or review because that helps others find us.
We're on Instagram, Twitter, as well as our website, snakesandotters.com.
I'm Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Join us next week. Same snake time, same otter channel.